The midday sun beat down on the military base like a hammer, making the air ripple with heat. Dust hung in the air from the boots of soldiers drilling in formation, their voices echoing across the yard as they barked responses to commands. But the sound was broken, interrupted by the stubborn silence of an old military transport engine that refused to start. It sat in the center of the yard, bulky, rusted around the edges, and coated in the grime of years. Mechanics had tried their luck, engineers had frowned at it, and even the more confident sergeants had rolled up their sleeves to no avail. Every attempt ended the same: a cough, a spark, and then silence. The general stood nearby, arms crossed, her uniform immaculate despite the heat. Her expression was one of controlled irritation, the kind that made even seasoned soldiers nervous. She was known not only for her strict discipline, but also for her sharp wit, and she had no patience for weakness. Her gaze locked on the dead engine, and for a moment the yard seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a half-smile tugging at her lips, she raised her voice loud enough for the entire camp to hear. "If someone manages to bring this thing back to life," she said, her tone both mocking and daring, "I'll marry him on the spot." The words hit the air like a spark in dry grass. Laughter erupted from the soldiers, rolling through the yard in waves. Some doubled over, slapping each other's backs, while others exchanged smirks and knowing glances. To them, it was clearly a joke, an impossible challenge wrapped in humor, designed to cut the tension of failure. The idea of the no-nonsense general tying herself to anyone, let alone over a piece of broken machinery, was absurd. The engine had defeated every expert in the base. No rookie or dreamer could possibly succeed where trained men had failed. Yet, standing on the edge of the crowd, a young recruit named Marcus didn't laugh. His eyes stayed fixed on the machine, his jaw tightening with quiet focus. Sweat trickled down his brow, but not from the heat. Unlike the others, he didn't see the engine as a lost cause. He saw the familiar lines of pistons, the faint smell of old oil, and the stubborn heart of a machine begging to be understood. His past in his uncle's garage whispered back to him. The countless nights spent with his hands buried in grease. The rhythm of tools against metal. The thrill of hearing an engine finally purr. The laughter around him grew louder, but Marcus didn't move. He could hear a few soldiers mocking already, whispering about how the rookie probably thought he could win the general's hand with a wrench. He ignored them, his eyes narrowing instead on the rusted beast in the yard. To everyone else, the general's challenge was a joke. But to Marcus, it was a door, one that had just been left slightly open, waiting for the right man to walk through. The barracks smelled of sweat, dust, and metal polish, a familiar mixture that clung to the air and seemed to sink into the very walls. Marcus sat quietly on his bunk, elbows resting on his knees, listening to the low hum of voices bouncing between the rows of beds. The other recruits were restless after the general's declaration earlier that afternoon. They couldn't stop replaying her words, laughing at the absurdity of them, tossing jokes back and forth as though it were the best entertainment they'd had in weeks. "You hear that, boys?" One of the older recruits jeered, tossing his boots under his bunk with a loud thud. "Marry the general if you can fix that pile of junk." "Ha! You'd have better luck marrying the president's daughter." The room erupted in chuckles, the kind that carried the smugness of men who thought they knew their place in the world and believed nothing could change it. Another voice cut through, sharper and dripping with mockery. "I bet rookie Marcus here thinks he's got a chance. Look at him, all quiet, staring at the floor like he's plotting something. You dreaming about wedding bells, Marcus? Gonna fix that engine and ride off into the sunset with the general on your arm." The laughter swelled again, filling every corner of the barracks. A few of them slapped their knees, delighted at their own cleverness, while others pointed at Marcus as though he were the punchline of a joke too easy to resist. Marcus didn't look up. He let their words roll over him like heavy rain on a tin roof, loud, distracting, but never enough to penetrate what was underneath. He was used to this. Back home, people had often underestimated him too. They had seen the color of his skin, the dirt under his fingernails, the calluses from long days in the garage, and thought they knew everything about him. They didn't know the hours he had spent bent over busted engines, the grease that had soaked into his skin, or the quiet pride that came with coaxing life out of machines everyone else had abandoned. His uncle's voice rose in his memory, as clear as the man were standing beside him now. Engines talk to you, Marcus. They complain, they whisper, they beg for patience. Don't force them. Listen, and they'll tell you exactly what they need. Those words had guided him countless times before, and he could almost hear the broken military engine out in the yard whispering its secrets, waiting for someone willing to listen. One of the recruits leaned closer, lowering his voice so only the surrounding bunks could hear. Don't waste your time, rookie. That machine's a coffin, and if you mess with it, it'll bury you right alongside your pride. Best stick to drills and cleaning latrines. That's about all you're good for. The sneer was followed by a ripple of cruel laughter, but Marcus remained still. His fists clenched once, tightly, then loosened. Inside, though, a fire had been lit. The general's challenge, meant as a joke, had struck a chord deep within him. He wasn't thinking about marriage, not really. What drove him was something heavier: respect, belonging, the chance to prove that he was more than just another faceless recruit. He wanted to show them, and maybe even himself, that his skills, his past, his persistence had value here. He knew engines better than most men knew themselves. So, while the barracks buzzed with laughter and doubt, Marcus made his decision in silence. Let them mock, let them doubt. He would bide his time, and when the night came, he would go to that engine. Alone, patient. Listening, and maybe, just maybe, he would make it sing again. The camp had fallen into a heavy stillness by the time Marcus slipped from his bunk. The barracks were dark. The only sound the soft rhythm of snores and the occasional rustle of someone shifting in their sleep. He moved carefully, his boots tied but muffled against the wooden floor, his breath steady and quiet. Outside, the night pressed down like a thick blanket, the air cooler now but still carrying the day's dust. The stars hung sharp above him, and the faint glow of the moon traced silver lines across the yard where the broken engine waited like a forgotten giant. Marcus's heart beat hard in his chest as he approached it. Each step felt like a test. If someone caught him sneaking out, there would be questions, maybe even punishment. But he didn't care. He wasn't doing this for glory or jokes, and certainly not for the promise of marriage. He was doing this because he couldn't let the machine sit there silent, mocking him, mocking everything he knew he was capable of. He stopped beside the hulking engine, resting his hand against its cold metal frame. For a moment, he closed his eyes and listened, as his uncle had taught him to do. In the silence of the night, with no laughter to distract him, he could almost hear it, the groan of parts too stiff with rust, the whine of wires left neglected, the cough of a heart that wanted to beat again. He rolled up his sleeves, pulled the small toolkit he had hidden under his bunk earlier, and knelt beside the machine. The first touch of the wrench against a bolt made a metallic echo that rang louder than he expected, and he froze, glancing around the yard. No shouts, no footsteps. The camp still slept. He let out the breath he had been holding and continued. His fingers moved with practiced ease, prying open panels, feeling along pipes, loosening screws that hadn't moved in years. Grace coated his hands, worked into his skin, and sweat dripped down his temples despite the coolness of the night. Hours seemed to blur into minutes. He worked methodically, carefully cleaning out clogged valves, replacing twisted wires, tightening what had been loose for far too long. The night insects hummed around him, their rhythm joining the clink of tools and the steady sound of his own breathing. Every now and then frustration bubbled in his chest when something refused to budge, but he forced himself to stay calm. Anger never fixed a machine, patience did. His uncle's words repeated in his mind like a prayer. Listen, don't fight it, work with it. By the time he wiped his forehead on his sleeve, the sky had shifted. The blackness of night was fading into a faint blue, the first whisper of dawn approaching. His body ached, his hands were raw, but the machine looked different now, less like a dead husk, more like something on the verge of waking. He tightened the final bolt, his heart racing faster than it had all night. He slid into the seat, his fingers trembling as he turned the ignition. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came a cough, a spark, and a sputter that made his pulse stop in fear. He whispered under his breath, begging the machine like an old friend. And then it came, the deep, ragged growl of the engine catching, followed by a steady roar as it sprang to life. The sound filled the yard, powerful and alive, echoing against the barracks like thunder. Marcus sat there, exhausted but grinning, the vibration of the machine running through his bones. Against all odds, he had done it. The first rays of dawn spilled across the camp, painting the dirt yard in muted shades of gold and orange. The soldiers stirred from their bunks, grumbling and yawning, boots thudding against the wooden floorboards as they prepared for another day of drills. But the usual silence of early morning was broken by a sound no one expected, the low, steady rumble of the transport engine echoing through the compound like a heartbeat that had finally returned after years of silence. At first, some thought they were still dreaming, the noise mixing with their half-conscious thoughts. But as the hum grew stronger, steadier, and unmistakably real, men rushed to the doorways, faces half-washed and uniforms crooked, drawn to the impossible sound. In the yard, the machine stood alive, its metal body vibrating as the engine purred with renewed strength. Exhaust curled into the air in thick white clouds, proof that this was no trick, no illusion. And there, sitting beside it, oil streaked in bone, tired but standing tall with pride, was Marcus. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, his uniform smeared with grease, and his hands looked like they'd been through a war of their own. Yet, despite his exhaustion, there was a calm certainty in his expression. He had brought the beast back to life. The soldiers gathered, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Their laughter from the previous day was gone, replaced by disbelief. Some shook their heads, unable to accept what their eyes and ears told them. Others whispered Marcus's name as if they were saying it for the first time, like it suddenly belonged to someone entirely new. A few wore expressions of shame, remembering the mocking words they had thrown his way in the barracks. The impossible had been made possible, and the rookie they had laughed at had done it alone. The general arrived moments later, her boots striking the ground with authority as she approached the crowd. The murmurs fell into silence as her sharp eyes fixed on the engine, then on Marcus. For the first time in a long while, she looked unsettled, caught between disbelief and grudging admiration. She walked slowly toward him, the air thick with anticipation. Every soldier watched, waiting to see how she would respond. Marcus wiped his hands on his uniform, leaving black streaks across the fabric, and straightened as best he could. His body screamed for rest, but he stood tall, meeting her gaze without flinching. She stopped just a few feet away, the hum of the engine filling the silence between them. "You did this?" she asked, her voice lower than usual, almost disbelieving. "Yes, Mom," Marcus replied, his tone steady but quiet. The general studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes searching his face, perhaps for a trace of arrogance or a smug grin. But Marcus offered none. What she saw instead was determination, humility, and the quiet strength of a man who had simply done what others thought impossible. She turned her head back to the engine, listening to its steady roar, then glanced again at Marcus, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Behind her, the soldiers shifted, waiting, some holding their breath. For the first time, Marcus was not the butt of a joke. He was the man who had turned silence into thunder, who had made the general's words, spoken in jest, into something that demanded respect. And though the morning sun was still climbing, Marcus knew this was the moment everything changed. The yard was still buzzing with the steady growl of the revived engine when the general stepped closer to Marcus, the faint smile on her lips turning sharper, almost playful. The soldiers crowded around, forming a loose circle, their eyes darting between their leader and the recruit who had pulled off the impossible. The morning air carried a crackle of anticipation, and though no one dared speak, their silence shouted louder than laughter ever could. This was a moment none of them wanted to miss. The general let the pause linger, her gaze moving from the machine to Marcus, then back to the machine as if confirming to herself that it was truly alive. Finally, she tilted her head, her voice ringing clear and steady, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Well, a deal is a deal. I said, whoever fixed it would marry me." She let the words hang in the air, her expression unreadable. A ripple ran through the crowd, half-stifled gas, muffled chuckles, a few widened eyes. Some soldiers looked at Marcus with open envy, others with disbelief. A handful exchanged nervous grins, unsure whether their commander was joking or dead serious. Marcus, standing tall despite the exhaustion weighing on his shoulders, blinked once, trying to gauge her tone. Was she testing him, teasing him, or was this her way of honoring her word? The general had a reputation for being harsh but fair, never backing down once she had spoken. His heart hammered in his chest, though not from fear, more from the weight of a promise spoken in jest that now pressed against reality. He drew in a slow breath, trying not to let the nervous tremor reach his voice. "Mom," he said carefully, "I wasn't doing this for." She cut him off with a raised hand, her eyes narrowing but not unkindly. "I know why you did it. But don't you try and back out of a promise that I made." A murmur of laughter broke from the crowd, though quickly stifled when the general's sharp glance swept over them. Then she turned back to Marcus, stepping forward until she was close enough for only him to hear the softer edge in her voice. "You've got guts, recruit, and more skill than half the men here who've been in uniform twice as long. Maybe you've earned more than just respect." She straightened again, letting her tone shift back into the commanding timbre the soldiers knew well. Raising her hand in a crisp salute, she declared, "Marcus, you've done what no one else could. The machine runs because of you. You've shown not only skill but perseverance. And as for my words," she let the pause stretch, her eyes glinting with humor now, "perhaps you should think carefully about whether you really want to hold me to them." The soldiers erupted in cheers, laughter, and a few playful whistles, the tension breaking into celebration. Some clapped Marcus on the back so hard he nearly stumbled. Others shouted his name like a chant. The recruit who had once been mocked as the butt of jokes was now the center of admiration. Marcus felt his chest swell, not from pride in the general's teasing promise, but from the respect in their voices, something far more valuable than any marriage vow. The general lowered her salute, and for just a moment, she let a genuine smile show. It was small, fleeting, but enough to tell Marcus she had meant what she said in her own way. Whether or not the marriage promise was real, one truth was undeniable. He had earned her respect, the respect of the entire base, and a place in the story they would tell for years to come.